Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. I'm Gretchen Marie Schaefer, and I'm the director of the Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Designer program. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. For those in our audience that are new guests to our campus, REMCAD was founded in 1963 and offers undergraduate and graduate degrees in a number of creative fields. The college is pleased to offer tonight's lecture as part of the Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Designer program, or what we call for short, or an attempt at brevity, the VASD program. This interdisciplinary initiative values passionate curiosity and explores critical, diverse, and creative inquiry through a variety of events and presentations. The program is proud to enrich the academic experience at REMCAD and to serve the greater Denver metro community. Tonight, we're honored to have guests J.K. Keller and Keetra Dean Dixon present their lecture titled Between the Two, as the fifth event of the VASD program's year-long series investigating humor. Continuing through this April, the Humor Lecture Series focuses on the use of comedy, parody, irony, and wit as instruments of communication and experimentation in art, design, and in culture. Existing in a boundary-blurring space where joy and anguish meet, humor allows creators to expose the severity and ridiculousness of contemporary life. J.K. Keller and Keetra Dean Dixon both received their bachelor degrees from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and Masters of Fine Arts from Cranbrook Academy of Art. Tonight's lecturers are joining us from Homer, Alaska, where they base their multidisciplinary art and design practice. J.K. Keller is a web designer, an artist primarily working in digital media with a subversive, tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. His work often employs appropriated material and rules-based systems in misuses of technology. Keller has received attention and acclaim for his ongoing series called The Adaptation to My Generation, which consists of a self-portrait taken every single day for the last 17 years. As well as a project that digitally manipulates an episode of The Simpsons frame by frame. Keller's work has been exhibited at the Walker Art Center and the Museum of Arts and Design, New York. Keetra Dean Dixon has a foothold in graphic design and creative direction, but her work also expands to involve objects, installation, and product design. Her projects are spurred by the fallibility of communication, attempts at connection, and unintended output. Dixon received the honorable ranking of Art Directors Club Young Gun, and her clients include the New York Times, Volkswagen, and Nike. She acted as design director for installation at the 2008 Venice Architecture Biennale and has shown at the Walker Art Center and the Smithsonian Design Museum. When thinking about Keller and Dixon's lecture, I was reminded of Denver's own Gene Fowler, who said, "Writing is easy. All you do is stare at a blank sheet of paper until drops of blood form on your forehead." Creative work is difficult work. Cast in a lure of free-spirited daydreaming, those who do it know that it's laborious, and at its worst, it can be drudgery, a slog, a grind. But the tortured artist is also a tired stereotype. For Keller and Dixon, moments of glee are not just a required coping skill, but a source of innovation and surprise. In this evening's lecture, Keller and Dixon will share their struggles and victories in navigating this difficult, bloody work, with an openness to the possibility of joy in intentional and accidental misinterpretation, the necessity of mirth in their working lives and partnership, and the laughable ridiculousness of life's supreme ability to complicate communication. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming J.K. Keller and Keetra Dean Dixon.
Hi.
Hello.
Is this the one? Do I talk into this mic?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah? Yeah, not that one.
So thank you so much, Denver and REMCAD, for the community. Specifically Gretchen, who's been amazing in our preparations here. And to all of you for coming out. I know that you have a big Super Bowl win to celebrate, or Ash Wednesday too. So thank you so much.
Okay, so for my own confidence, I'm
sorry.
gonna make.
forgot to do
Oh,
that.
yeah, that's us, JK and Keetra. But I wanted to start with a little disclaimer because I know this is the humor series. Yeah, we're not gonna be funny. So I apologize in advance. I know it's the best way to start a lecture is to promise it's,
Demise.
not gonna be funny, but boosting my own confidence there. So when Gretchen invited us to do the lecture, you guys heard a little snippet of this description. And we are in love with particularly this part about joy and anguish meeting and blurring. And I think it's an awesome summary of actually our work and kind of our relationship. So I will be playing the part of joy. I do lots of stuff like this.
Yeah. And I stand devoted to my own anguish of experiencing the world through a flattened or repressed distortion field, as I like to call it. Of course, this is a gross oversimplification of us two. We're both fascinatingly complex people, as we all are, right? But we both have a little bit of this process, or both a bit of each of these sides in us, both in our process and in our final works. But we tend to lean to the different sides. Keetra wanting to instill joy and me kind of focusing on this anguish side. But I think it's the contrast of these perspectives that makes us work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, I would agree. Okay, so JK and I have known each other for almost 20 years, and we've been married for 10. But before coupling officially, we had these weirdly parallel paths. So we both grew up in these rural settings. Both of my parents had careers focusing on practical fabrication. My mom was a seamstress and my dad was a metalsmith.
Yeah, and I was the son of a nurse and a guy who artificially inseminated cows for a living. So
It's kind of funny.
you grow up a little off kilter when there's a frozen bull semen in liquid nitrogen vat in your garage at all times. So that's my background. And after those formative years, we both attended the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, as Gretchen said.
I know, boo. Sorry. Nemesis naming, Remke. And then after school, we both moved far away from Minneapolis. I moved out to San Francisco during the dot-com boom and got my first big exposure to new media.
Yeah, and I kind of shied away from the sinister allure of the tech scene of San Francisco at the time. And I went to Antarctica, which was amazing, using my BFA to its fullest as a janitor. But it was an amazing experience. And then to the opposite end of the spectrum, to New York. And then we both happened to end up at the Cranbrook Academy of Art.
And that's where the magic happened. Maybe kids don't call it that today. We hooked up at Cranbrook. And we secretly got hitched. And you can see here we both kind of had these slightly subconscious apprehensions about marriage. This one's one of the things that says, this is mine, and it says the great delusion. So I was like, but fortunately, I think we turned out okay, pretty good. But because we're married and sometimes we make work together, people assume that we're overall this cohesive and collaborative team. But in reality, we are fiercely stubborn, independent makers that are always making stuff side by side. And then we have a lot of these methods in common. So we have a tremendous amount of influence on one another. And then occasionally we kind of collide and then make work together, but really pretty independent.
Yeah, so what do these sort of daily side-by-side lives look like? We kind of both shuffle back and forth between artists and designers. I tend to have a heavier focus on coding and scripting and how the computer and the internet affect and influence self-realization. But where we really differ greatly is whether or not that art and that design realm either weave themselves together or whether they're two patches of the quilt that is a person. So I split my art and design lives. I like to think of the relationship with, or my relationship with design proper, kind of like the stereotypical archetype of the actor who's mostly a waiter. It's the day job versus the core pursuit. And so my day job is as a web designer and developer at a large private foundation that works on international human rights issues. And I made this conscious decision to take a day job that would allow me to comfortably commit to doing the work that I wanted to do after that time of 9 to 5. And normally I wouldn't really talk about this, but since we're the guests of a school, I think it's important for design students to hear an alternative to the follow your bliss and start your own design studio route. And then for art students to hear an honest admission that most artists still need to make a side income, and you need to reconcile how to best integrate that into your life dynamic. So we'll get into more meaty works shortly, but I want to quickly show a range of the works that are part of my studio practice. So since one half of me is a designer, my art often has a connection to typography or utilizes the tools of design. So this project, Slit Scan, slices all of the fonts on a person's computer in an inadequate attempt to try to represent their personality through their font sets. I've also been known to obsessively layer sticker dots to give substance to the idea that sometimes it takes a lot of work and effort just to end up saying nothing or to be totally misunderstood by someone. And these are done by hand using, physical circles, but they're directly influenced by my experimentation with code and scripting. I like to think of my playing around with code that generates visuals like I'm doodling in my sketchbook. I'm sharpening the axe of my making so that these bits can be used later on. And that knowledge of code has helped me make some amazingly juvenile websites that utilize the browser's fluid window width in a humorous way. Got a laugh on that one. Good job.
Good.
But then this juvenilia is contrasted with like a deep-seated obsession with distorting perceptions of my own image. Obviously, someone that takes their photo every day for 17 years and till I'm dead.
I get the
thinks
dead
about
one.
that a lot. There's a good mustache waving around. So I get caught in these loops, self-obsessed loops. And when you get caught in loops, you end up doing a number of animated GIF studies. Yeah, I don't need to talk about them. And all of these are what I consider my studio practice as an artist. The use of play and humor are ways that allow me to more easily open up my mind to creativity and new horizons, new forms. They really sow the seeds for potentially larger works.
Okay, now me. These jobs are totally smushed together. I didn't go the route that JK did. And my kind of self-authored work, the work that uses my voice, and the client work has kind of blurred together and interwoven so much that now they're this big meandering practice. But there are a couple of general buckets that it falls into. I have this lettering, some people call it design-istration. It's like part graphic design, part illustration. And for this type of work, it's just me working on the projects all the way from concepting and copywriting through to final execution, which I love. And then I do lots of designing of experiences in spaces, and my title for this type of work is experiential director. And I'm working with really big teams to do these client-driven installs. And these range all over from formally seductive work like this, to still beautiful work, but experiences that really emphasize usability or innovate a new platform to feature content. So this example is a large-scale gestural platform and interface that I directed for Google Paris's Cultural Institute as a way for visitors to navigate through their historic visual archives. And this kind of stuff looks a little less joyful, but they let me dress up like this for final installations, which I will never get tired of. And then I also do product development, and all the products are a little bit unusual. Like these guys, these are crayons. And I was hoping to ask the audience to make a choice to either use or keep them. So through your actions, you show whether you value them as tool or you value them as art. And then there are these pillow guys. This is kind of an irreverent combination of comfort and fear, and I was hoping to parallel sleep and death. Here they are in use. They're all, I know, this is Frankie. She's awesome. That's me like a billion years ago. So they're also called the blood puddle pillows. That is the nickname. And they're inspired by those kind of intense moments where you'll look at a sleeping loved one and they'll be just a little bit too still for a little too, yeah, and you're like, should I check? Yeah. So it's about taking ownership over those kind of morbidly intrusive thoughts through humor and play. And this like risk and play combination is a reoccurring theme in most of my self-authored work. Okay, so both JK and I have somewhat absurd or ridiculous results, but the subjects themselves are pretty different.
Yeah, my relationship, as I noted, is with the computer, or computers, the phone, all of those little gadgets, and how I use them to reflect an inward evaluation of my place in the world.
And I focus outward. I foster or reflect social connection and try to make work that talks about how we relate to other people. And then we have a few of these overlapping ways that we manipulate or alter those subjects. Okay, so I get to go first with syncing up people. A good example of this project I gave you a little tiny peek at earlier. And it started with a small series of installs that I was doing in public parks. And these installs were called They All Fall Down, the Teeter Swings. And they're intended as this metaphor for navigating social relation. So the way they work is the teeter swings aren't attached to their support structure, and there's no limit on how far they can tip. So negotiating the swing is this act of balance with a partner and predicting the other person's movement and constantly adjusting. And of course, there is serious risk.
Totally not my fault. I just have cat-like reflexes.
No, yeah, he loved it. I was like, son of a, no, but this was made out of really crappy garage scraps, so that it wasn't my fault either. No, it wasn't. Yeah, but I retooled it and got the bugs worked out, and did a few more iterations and documented them, and I think I just posted them to my website. And then like 8 months later, I got a call from my alma mater, MCAD, asking me to create a new site-specific work for an event affiliated with the Walker. And I was like, ooh, cool. And they cited these guys, the teeter swings, as the type of work they were hoping for, but a little less dangerous. And they gave me a choice of locations. I chose these crazy, enclosed skyway bridge things. And I sent back a couple ideas all of which were what I call 2 steps over the line, like just a little further than anything a client should say yes to. And one of the ideas was this. This was a very simple rendering that I sent. And this is the swing hall. And I proposed filling the hall with swings positioned one in front of another in a queue, as opposed to side by side like a traditional swing. And the idea was that the swings would be close enough together that you would have to swing in sync to swing at all. Can you read on the bottom? It says, out-of-pace swinging results in playful collision. And I said that, and they said, great, let's do it. And I was like, oh, no. You guys know that I'm proposing essentially a crash machine. And they said, no, it will be fine. And I was like, oh, okay, that's my mantra is it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine. And so I dove into the planning process, which was kind of a nightmare to convince health and safety and building facilities and, the lawyers that it's gonna be fine. But eventually, after 3 or 4 months of planning, we got the guy installed, and it looks almost exactly like that rendering, which is kind of unusual, so I'm proud. And the structure was incredibly sound, but I still had all of these overriding fears that I'd made something on which people could get seriously hurt. Like, what if a mom and her little baby are swinging, or just a really giant guy is aggressive? Lots of aggressive swinging, and if you guys ever have the chance, swinging and kicking the ceiling indoors is far better than you think it. It sounds awesome. It's incredible. Load-bearing tests. No, I'm kidding. We did that's just us double-decker swinging, very romantic. We did legitimate load-bearing tests, and each swing was built to support over 600 pounds, so big guys could come on it. Lots of additional precautions. We have the Happy Smash liability waiver, which is legally binding, and they had to get a wristband to ride. And we had tons of swing guards on site. A very enthusiastic one was this guy. But we got to the big opening night, which was actually an all-night event. It lasted from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. And yeah, right?
It's an amazing program in Minneapolis, St. Paul that they've got.
Spark. If Minneapolis Spark, go see it. But we ended up having a tremendous foot flow of traffic. It was far more people than anybody anticipated, which resulted in the swings always being fully occupied, and that really impacted the experience. So as you kind of approach the Skyway at night, it's internally lit. So essentially it becomes this stage. So you'd walk up, and people would walk up, and they kind of see the swings in action and see what they were supposed to be doing. And then people would come inside, file in line, wait in line to swing. And then when it came their turn, everybody would walk in. Let me see if I can get the timing right on this. And they would all face the same way. They would scooch back into the start position and wait. And then I'd come in and say, does everybody want to try an in-sync swing? 1, 2, 3. Oh, I almost got the timing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So
this is when the squeals of laughter and joy were just like, every person was.
And sweat. It was also really hot inside. It was, what?
150 degrees.
Yeah, it was crazy. But initially, I was a little bit disappointed that it became such a scripted experience, but there's still all of this negotiation going on. And I love this kind of transition of audience to performer. And I love the fact that this built structure had this inherent behavior that revealed itself. And of course, the reaction, every time a new set of people came up to see it, they'd be like, oh yeah, when it started. So that was delightful. And then being inside this thing was like being inside the belly of some crazy Viking ship or something. Oh, it was thrilling. So overall, total success. The final install had 24 swings, and on the first night, over an 8-hour period, we had more than 1,400 swingers and 0 injuries. And it was so well received that MCAD has made it an annual install. So seriously, if you hear Northern Spark, come get a few bruises because it's worth it. And so in the end, I'm asking people to, fall into this alignment and sync up in this like slight risk, but overall very playful and really unfamiliar experience.
Yeah, I mean, I really love that Keetra is attempting to create a sense of like kind of communal action through syncopated movement, because it's working with people is not something that I find myself doing. I'm more like trying to sync my actions up to the machine. So in 2009, I attempted to draw a straight line on the scanner. If you know how a scanner works, like light goes across, right? So using a variety of drawing implements, I did a series of performative drawings where I had to match that excruciatingly slow pace of the scanner light moving across the pane of glass. These are some of the implements that I did tests with. And because the scanner only sees like one subpixel, like RGB, at a moment, it causes these distortions and color shifts and new formal elements. Some people call it the new aesthetic. And you're really illuminating the mechanics of how the scanner works at a very fundamental and minuscule level. But you're also finding this sort of like liminal space between man and machine where one's human inadequacies are writ large, where your feeble hand and your steady heart are questioned. And it's a sad state of affairs when you're staring through sunglasses with a clenched jaw in a futile attempt to be perfect. And Keetra she's fond of calling me a robot.
He's my robot, yeah.
Mostly due to my lack of emotions, but for other reasons. Hard as I may try, moving as robotically as I can muster, I'm never going to achieve this like cyborg transition into the perfect machine. That makes me sad.
Aw.
Makes me anguished.
Anguished, yes,
Sorry.
yes. Okay, now touch. Okay, I have to say like touching people, which sounds a little bit pervy, but that's kind of appropriate for this project. The anonymous hugging wall. So this guy is, yeah, don't you just want to hug it? Yeah. It is bright and whimsical and a little perverse. And there's been actually a lot of iterations of this guy, but the first one was bright pink, enormous, monolithic, and essentially a giant Snuggie. And it was 7 feet tall and 60 feet long with this single set of little mitten arms sticking out of the center. And with this wall, I was hoping to address the extreme longing to connect socially, combined with this fear of like breaking social boundaries. So simultaneously maintaining and breaking those boundaries. So the wall is actually installed and left uninhabited. There's not like a hugger in there all the time. And so these little arms are kind of sad when you see it unoccupied. But then the very first interaction I ever had with it was not at all what I expected. This is a horrible picture of my wonderful little brother, Shannon, who helped me prototype the first wall out in Alaska. And he came up and I was like, blindly reaching out, thinking somebody would grab my hand or guide my arm or something. And he, I'm holding my breath and listening, and he punched me right in the stomach. I was like, awesome. I should not have been surprised, but I was terribly surprised. And I kind of loved it. I mean, he was doing exactly what a little brother should do. But the actual act, even when it's not a punch, the actual act of using the wall is a little bit different than you would expect, because there is this really odd give-take relationship with a hug in the wall. It's the power position, as my brother demonstrated right away, is with the hug-e. So the hugger is the one in the wall in the arms, and the hug-e is the one that can punch you or let you hold them. So when you are a hugger, you're in the wall and you're blindly reaching out, and your face and your body is kind of swathed in, hot pink fleece, which makes you feel vulnerable and exposed, and you're reaching out without a capability of moving forwards or backwards, and just hoping that someone will come along. And that feels really desperate and vulnerable. And then when you actually seduce someone into a little hug, in this odd framework, it's really emotionally confusing. And I think part of it is because it's kind of a rare occurrence. This is made at the height for two adults to interact, about my height, or somewhere around there. And I think that to partake in a hug where one adult is just holding the other, or just letting yourself be held as an adult, is unusual. And then within this framework, there's all of this comfort and risk and vulnerability, and you feel a little bit violated and protected at the same time, which is lovely. And then there's this high creep factor, of course, and I was hoping to parallel that with this social stigma or kind of shame that we feel when we admit to loneliness. And I was trying to balance all of that with this playful and innocent and ridiculous tone of pink and the material of child fabric to kind of lure people into the vulnerable touch.
Yeah, crazy, right?
It's simple.
So she's doing all of this stuff, meaningful connections with people, again. And I'm just trying to find...
That is good anguish right there. That's great.
Yeah, it is. Just trying to find new ways of connecting with my mini computer phone. So you can see here, I begin by prepping my canvas for the iPhone oil paintings.
Yeah.
So this is one of those projects by all of your, right. It's an idea that's so simple, it's fairly obvious and completely ubiquitous, that the success of it lies almost exclusively on being the first one to make it happen and put it online, and hopefully a bunch of people see it, because you want to beat everyone. It's a big part of life, right? We've all pushed the oil around on these screens at some point. So after conceiving of the idea, I needed to be quick about making these animations, because I was worried, like I said, that someone else would create them first, or something similar at least. So I needed to bust these out in a few hours, and I did, which is like out of my comfort level to the extreme. I'm not good at being fast at all. I like to stew and hem and haw and like fiddle and just begin slowly, even on the simplest of projects, so I was happy about that. But it's nice that the seed of the idea was actually already in my arsenal. The oil paintings are an extension of another series of works where I replaced my mouse pad with a sheet of paper for 6 to 12 months. And so the constant contact from my wrist resulted in these drawings that are dirt and grit and grease and grime. They're echoes of my intimate relationship with the computer. I like to think of it as like a circumstantial memory, but they're more of a passive image generation. And so with the iPhone paintings, I wanted a more intentional creation of the imagery. And so I began drawing on some of the work that was being done by other artists at the time. They were abstract swirls, swashes, these paint strokes, boops and bits and baubles and whatnot. But what they were doing was extending a trend of using painting apps on tablets and phones. And so instead of pulling the imagery out of the phone, I was letting them rest on the surface, reducing the medium of oil to the barest essence of using form from light and reflection for optical effect. And then I started playing around with other light colors. But I wanted to show that through a purposeful effort, the unseemly nasty elements that we live with daily can be refashioned into expressive moments of beauty, I hope, in a humorous way. And I think that they land on this nice line of, oh, cool, and ew, that's actually really gross. That's your face grease, thanks. But it exemplifies this uneasy relationship we have with technology. On the one hand, our phone is always with us. It's attached to us, acting as a distraction and as noise. But on the other hand, it's providing us with this increased capacity for information and communication. You're able to finally settle that bet of who was in that movie very, very easily. And so that's that. Now, I don't just rub myself on slick surfaces that emanate light. Sometimes I talk to that rectangular wonder that is the phone, the iPhone. So a few years ago, when Siri, the voice recognition system, became available, I started collaborating with her on poetry projects. The iPhone's really good at translating what you want to say into text. But I was curious, well, what if you fed Siri nonsense words, scat, sound effects, things like that? Things that she wouldn't have any need to know. So that's real. It's a video translating this guy named Shuby Taylor. He's also known as the human horn. Amazing scat guy. And while it's not totally apparent in this video, Siri actually spit back some strangely poetic phrases that I really, really liked. And so after that initial test with Shuby, I wanted to increase the futility of understanding between me and Siri. So I decided to begin with Kurt Schwitter's sound poem Ursinate, which is this seminal piece of nonsensical sound art that he worked on over the course of decades. And then in 1934, the poem was actually transcribed into the final publication of his periodical Mers, and was set, as you see here, the typography was set by this great German designer, Jan Tischhold. And I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly, but so just to give you a sense of what this actually sounds like when an amazing person performs it. Here. Oh, it's amazing. Now imagine that. I love listening to that. Imagine that for an hour. It's pretty crazy. That guy's name is Jacques Blanc. He's one of the only, probably 2 or 3 people in the world who can actually perform that from memory. One day I aspire to that, but probably not. So then last year, both Keetra and I performed the entire Ursinate poem in our own voice. Well, we actually just read it off a piece of paper. We didn't perform it. And then the resulting text was set in the same typographic manner that Tischhold's originally designed had. And so here's some of our nice little bits. And I think it has this nice conceptual relationship to William S. Burroughs, his cut-up technique, where he takes a book and cuts up the text, and then you randomly place it back together again, and that's your text. And what he'd like to say is when you cut into the present, the future leaks out. And I like to think of the processes that I'm doing by saying that when you glitch up the digital, the human speaks out.
And I like that too. So both JK and I do this kind of cutting into the digital as a form of open research outside of goal-oriented making to find unexpected form. And JK typically goes on to amplify the distortion or nonsense in the findings, and I use them to hopefully communicate better in my traditional graphic design lettering stuff. These are all treatments for the New York Times. And then sometimes I use the approach of breaking or using things wrong to try to talk to JK. or scream at him occasionally. And that actually transitions us into reforming our tools. A lot of the objects that I end up making are actually tools you can never use, like these guys. These are the objects of codependency. So each one is summarizing a unique take on codependency. And I was hoping the objects would lead viewers to imagine a ridiculous or a futile shared experience centered around the items, and kind of exaggerate the difficulty of those relationships in reality. So these are tools to reflect or embody messed up relationships.
Right, well, I'm using tools to actually create messed up relationships. Most of the time, I'm not actually creating my own tools, despite the coding and stuff. Usually I'm pulling from the default stack of that's within design software, so Adobe Creative Suite, for example. But then I use them in ways that they weren't not even necessarily, they weren't intended. So for example, Illustrator's image trace and alignment tools. When I use those,
I just love the part where it's like just a little bit.
so some of you may have, if you're from Denver, have seen this. I was nice enough to be part of some experience called Urban Encounters, I think, where they showed this on a huge screen somewhere in downtown Denver. I'm fuzzy on the details now because it was a couple years ago, but
Gretchen says yes.
I got it right? Okay. So what I'm doing here is taking an entire episode of The Simpsons and deconstructing it and redistributing all of the frames in the video by turning all of the colors into shapes that can then be rearranged independently. So the episode was then processed through 23 different alignment operations, so the left align, top align, all of these others, which each resulted in a separate video that had a corresponding audio manipulation. So you heard some of the audio manipulations there. And despite them being these glitched out messes, the pop cultural status of The Simpsons, gave each a certain familiarity. There were entry points where you could start to recognize things. And I like, it's almost like you're watching a memory of things to come. It's like this de-evolved world in which the cultural products of the future are just realigned versions of the current offerings. And this is also one of the only episodes that exclusively focuses on art. And I chose it because Homer becomes this accidental outsider artist. If you don't know, sorry if I'm repeating this to you nerds out there, but he does this by putting together a grill incorrectly, to put it mildly. But this incorrect way of building and using tools is a major part of my process. I'm trying to accidentally, on purpose, use tools and algorithms to hopefully find where their breaking points are. If you saw the Simpsons movie, you may remember that it began with this visual joke. The picture frame that was first projected on the movie screen was the old 4:3 aspect ratio of cathode ray television. And then to emphasize that they were moving from TV to movies, the sides widened and you were treated to the full 16:9 film experience. And so this series of works actually imagines a distorted version of that same progression of display technology. So from standard definition to high def. And with the expansion of HD TVs and the resurgence of remastering old TV shows, I wanted to use intentionally misguided software tools to sort of prepare these shows for their new widescreen debuts, right? And so this episode is actually the last episode that they shot in SD before they actually transitioned to HD. And then again, the audio was manipulated in a manner consistent with the image distortion. So we're just going to listen to a couple different shows, The X-Files, Simpsons, Star Trek, the very first one, and another show that I'm forgetting.
Did you say
picking up 4 Federation starships.
Oh, he's nobody. Hey, listen, let me top that off for you.
So,
right?
thanks. That's awkward.
No, he's a robot. He doesn't know. Unexpected feedback. Yeah.
Anyway, so I like to think of these videos, I like to think that they're this twisted vision of the techno-solutionists. It's like this absurd parody of Silicon Valley's, hey, let's solve the world's problem with software attitude. Because when they're left to their own devices, the algorithms don't know how fucked up their revisioning of the world becomes. Yet, we still can't help but be enamored by the eccentric outcomes that they produce.
Okay, so we're both doing absurd or ridiculous stuff. JK dwells, and I'm really quick and sporadic. JK dives into futility, and I turn up play, and you're all about machines, and I'm all about people. So we're kind of opposites, but we really do have all of these overlapping methods. And this very natural symmetry of thought seems like it would easily conjoin. And so back in 2009, we were invited as a couple to do work for a typography show, and we thought we would try this traditional mode of collaboration, this like, 50-50 together. So I'm gonna tell you about the experience while you look at the process we ended up doing. So together we came up with some parameters that we actually did decide mutually. It would be physical type, we wanted to show evidence of time passing, and we wanted it to relate to an emotional state. And then we sat across the table from each other with our sketch pads in hands and pencils, and did this kind of dueling brainstorming. But we were never building off of each other's ideas, and we weren't really coming up with anything good. And eventually, I just got a little pissed off, and I said, fine, I will just do it for us. And I took on the role of JK, and I tried to think like him and come up with an idea, because that's exactly the same as collaborating, right? But it worked. And I came up with the idea, and it was, of course, based around rule systems and procedural processes, and developed a method for fabricating this thing. And the results for the work are here. So these are the layered wax pieces. So we chose, the emotional state we chose was dwelling, another JK-inspired thing. And then we translated that state into a physical process and let that process play out. So hot wax, changing the color with each layer, hand hot waxing this positive type. So these studies are really looking at the evolution of meaning and this loss of linguistic control, and it's kind of this convergence of the medium and the message, which is not very humorous, but a couple of funny things happened because of the work. We got to see just how hot is too hot for the layered wax pieces. This is a little sad. We got to be the talk of the town because we kept having wax delivered to our doorstep. Overall, we had 500 pounds of it. And then we kept hauling all of these enormous art handling crates out of our front porch window.
Yeah.
There's Frankie again.
Frankie approves.
Yeah, she's like, new doghouse? We're like, get out of there, it's going to the walker.
Don't put more of your hair in there.
Exactly. The first piece, this is the first piece that we made. It was called I've Been Thinking of You for a While. And it was actually 5 feet long and 1.5 feet wide, so it was kind of my size, which is a little weird to describe yourself that way. But the art handling crate that we made for it ended up looking like this little baby coffin. And the gallery we were sending it to didn't know what they were getting. So I love the idea of them getting this like morbid box in the mail, and then they open it and there's this type rock inside. So the outcome was nice, and we've done quite a few of these. And we actually split the labor of the first one 50-50. And then JK, for a couple of the later series, you did most of the work. But because I initiated the idea, JK has always felt like it's my work. Which I totally do not agree with. So it's resulted in all of this kind of unsettled feelings about ownership and credit and pride with the resulting work, which is difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue that it comes up fairly often since we sit side by side. You start to see bits and pieces of my coding studies ending up in Keetra's work. Or I forget that a suggestion or a reference made by her when we're talking about something I'm having trouble with was actually the true instigator for the creation of a series of works, which she reminds me later on, don't get me wrong. But we like to wallow in this influence of proximity. It's me trying to be you, trying to be me, infinitely phasing between yourself and the other. They say that couples, as they grow old, they begin to look and act like one another. Then they get a dog, and that dog looks like them. And that's all okay if you let it happen naturally, but if we force it too much, then we just both come out ugly. Keetra thinks that she looks like a witch when she's got my profile, and I think I look like a little Shrekky when I have hers.
But it's good that we actually kind of figured all of this stuff out before we made this next big move. We moved to Alaska in 2014. And the reason for the move, which people always ask, why New York City to Alaska? My dad was terminally ill, so it was important that I was close to him. And JK was like, I'm in, let's go.
Sorry, that was
not like, woo, your dad's, but like, yes.
Woo.
See, it's okay. They know. They knew what you meant.
That's what you got for you clapped, and now I'm all thrown off.
He's like, human feedback, fun.
Oh, feelings bubbling up.
Anyway, okay, we packed up everything, and we drove across the country with our 2 little dogs stuck in the front of a U-Haul truck. And we moved to 5 hours south of where my parents live, so just far enough away that I could stay sane. And luckily, our house came with all of this awesome stuff. It was a mess, but it was awesome. And most importantly, we have the internet. So we thought we could really make this happen. And we moved about 20 minutes outside of a little town called Homer, as you heard before. We decided we would go up there and test this claim that these days we can do our job from anywhere, but we really are in the middle of nowhere. We actually live on the top of the mountain range that overlooks Homer. There's our house. Okay, can you kind of see it in the middle? So for JK, this meant he got to do exactly the same thing that he's always been doing.
Super lucky, just kept my job, and now I've got the comfort to explore.
Yeah, I didn't do that, and smushed everything together, and so for me that meant I got to freak the F out. So I went up there and I gave myself the first year to just figure things out, like take time, clean up everything, and recalibrate my entire life and my practice and kind of take a sabbatical. So I went back to these kind of old methodologies, the making through breaking that JK and I share, the cutting into the digital, and then also thinking through making, doing these one-a-day exercises, which gave me structure and got me into a ritual of producing in this new context. So that was good. And it has led to the more solo practice of lettering, which has been great, and I've developed a few more products, which has been really fun. But this super isolated context means that most of the time I only see him. And so I like this image because when I look at it, it looks like we're breathing the same air, and that is what we're doing up there. So this is actually the double loon, and it is part of that Objects of Codependency series that I showed earlier. And I think it actually encapsulates our relationship pretty well. We aren't codependent. The way that the balloon is codependent is, it takes two to enact. And as you're putting effort into it, the more you put into it, the more it obscures your partner and the less clearly you can see the other person. And then additionally, this looks fantastically fun from the outside, but the act of using the thing itself is disgusting. You really are like breathing each other's air sometimes, and it's really moist. Like there's a lot of spit yeah.
It's more moist on the bottom.
That's a short joke. Yeah, it's more moisture rolls downhill. Sweet. But it's true. But the way that it really encapsulates JK and I is that when you're using this thing, it feels like you're kind of arm wrestling with your breath. And at certain moments you can rest while the other person works, but the minute you feel them stop, you don't want them to know you've been resting, so you start to keep up again. And so it has this weird collaborative, combative, adaptive relationship, and that is very much like JK and I. So being in Alaska together has amplified all of those things, this collaborative, combative, adaptive thing, and our ebb and flows, our emotional, I'm Freudian slipping, creative highs and lows have a much bigger influence on one another. And at one point, I was kind of in a low, and then he was in a serious low, and he kind of stomped into the room one day and he said, "I'm over it. I'm done making. I'm never making anything again." And I was like, what?
Just with that voice,
yeah.
too.
I was, yeah, you did. That was that thing. And I was like, what good are you to me then? What, so it, but it was a serious question. I was like, oh my, what happens when he's gone? And the answer is I get sad, and then I make stuff like this. And I make stuff like this. And this says lovesick, woven together. It's a blanket. So I've been actually integrating a lot more anguish. There's still a lot of play. And I'm a little happier now. We're cool. But I like this. I like digging into the dark a little bit more so. And I'm happy to report that JK has gone back on his word, and he is making stuff again.
Yeah.
We both still have, I know, yay. Woo! Oh, what are you gonna do now?
It's funny. I didn't know Gretchen was gonna bring up the quote from your Denver writer. All you have to do is sit and focus on a piece of paper until blood drips off your forehead, or however it specifically goes, but it's one of my favorite quotes, and it's actually something that I think this is the point where blood is finally dripping down my forehead again. And so I'm doing more tests and experiments, more tedious, iterative processes, but I'm gonna leave you with a work in progress. It's something that isn't online or public yet. and it's a test, one, but it's really a test of forcing the joy into my body.
You're forcing joy, and you're also kind of working with people.
Yeah.
About that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, bass. Cause you know I'm all about that bass, 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 about that bass.
Turn this bass up.
Do we? Yeah, thank you guys so much.
So we would like to open it up to questions.
So my question is about your codependent tools.
Yeah.
Did you actually make all those, or are they image manipulations?
The lighter is an image manipulation, and the first one of the double loons was faked, and then all of them have been made. And the second yellow one is another iteration of the balloons. So, yeah, there's one that is a proof of concept. So, yeah.
But initially they all started
They
out
all start
as-
out with proof of concepts, because then I have to figure out if I can make them. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the new aesthetic? The new aesthetic you described earlier.
James Bridle.
What is it?
There's
Is it-
actually
Okay.
this is. Should we
Yeah,
talk
go
about
for
the
it.
two?
If you got it, go
Oh
on.
no, you can. This is on video. Yeah.
I know.
Go. His name's James
Yeah,
Bridle.
James Bridle.
Is that the right name? Does anybody know in
Yeah.
the audience? Somebody nodded. Yeah, a little bit. Machine vision, right?
Yeah, I mean, it plays into it's basically it's kind of well, it's what I talked about, where it's finding these fault lines where new technology. God, I'm totally messing this up. But new technology produces new forms that you never would have intended by making that technology. So the most classic example of the new aesthetic is it's a Google image of a jet flying across a map. And what happens is, because the jet is flying so fast, the sensor on the satellite that's taking that image actually is taking a red value, a green value, and a blue value at different milliseconds, probably microseconds, nanoseconds, I don't even know what. But what that does is it splits the plane into these 4 colors. It's very much like CMYK printing when you are off register with one of the colors. It shifts, and now you actually see what is composing this image. That's like a big part of it. It's just a lot of it's about this sort of like weird glitches. It's a little bit different than glitching, but
I think the reason I say machine vision as an easy summary, because in my head I'm like, oh, we humans created the machines and set up these systems, but then those machines and systems are set in place and making continual observations, and then they get these unexpected results back. And that summarizes the new aesthetic. So it's an array of visual results, but the consistent thing is a human didn't expect it to happen. But James Bridle can be credited for starting the blog and using the name, The New Aesthetic. And I think I was teaching at the same time, and half of my students who were like really in the know, and they started using The New Aesthetic as this new default graphic design language. So I think there's a little bit of simultaneous use of that terminology, but the way he meant it was the James Bridle new aesthetic way. Mm-hmm. Does that answer the question?
hopefully.
Okay, cool. Yeah, hopefully you didn't mess it up. Yeah. I saw a
So
hand.
have you ever settled an argument through a collaborative piece, and what did that entail, if you did?
Hell no. How do we settle arguments? I don't think we settle arguments. Do we?
We just let time pass.
Yeah, we just, we agree
When
on
one of us forgets.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I forget.
Yeah, no, we're just terrible collaborators, so actually trying to use it to solve something would be a horrible idea.
Yeah, we are both always right, both of us.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, we're always.
That's the end of it usually. Like, you go over there and do your thing. Yeah, and then that's fine.
I think
we
that's-
happen to co-align with so much stuff that it's not that big of a problem. But I wish we had a better answer. You gave us a new goal. We're going to have a fight and make it work.
Yeah, it's about how to answer that question.
Yeah, it is. Oh, no. Okay, hi.
So there's this program called Deep Dream that takes like images. I was wondering if you guys have like played around with that. It like makes weird things.
So here's my feelings on deep dreams. Right now.
Bam! What was that?
Just because you brought it up, and I've been thinking about it a lot. So if you don't know what deep dream is, it's developed by Google. It's a neural network that actually lets you create an image based on a whole bunch of other images. And most of those, when they first came out, the set that they used as the source were these slugs and these dogs. So it would put eyes and noses and bits and pieces of each of those things into images. And so it was like this kind of filter. It was everything looked the same. So that was my problem with it. It was like the new photo mosaics. You know, like, sure, the person that created photo mosaics, where you take all the photos and it creates another one, it's awesome. That guy's a genius, right? The people that created Deep Dream are geniuses, but everyone that's been using it it's just a filter. So not a big fan of it.
But what's interesting about it...
But it's just starting out, and a lot of people are now using it in much more interesting ways, trying to stylistically.
And I think the interesting part is, so it's really, we both do the like tool breaking thing, and the whole goal is to look at your tools and then pick apart and peel the seams away and understand how the machines are seeing, right? And better understand the systems around you and these defaults that influence how you're making and how you can actually take those on responsibly and blah, blah, blah. So this deep dream thing, obviously it's gonna have an influence on our aesthetic, as like the picture mosaic is a great example that all of a sudden we're like nauseous with like ubiquity of seeing all these picture mosaics. The interesting thing, what is a neural network, J.K. Keller?
Oh, I don't know how to explain that.
The way
I'll be honest.
I think that's the interesting part is that there's new, there's procedural computational programs that are relatively linear and exhaust possibilities. Neural networks
it's basically
play out like tree structures.
It's an artificial intelligence.
And then when you overlap those systems, it narrows the amount of possibilities that you're using, and that's going to be really influential on the aesthetics that we use in the future. And I think looking at Deep Dream is the first example of something that is doing it in, I think, kind of a not very interesting way, but it shows all of the potential to come.
I will say, though, I do have 2 projects that I specifically want to use the cheap, bad version of Deep Dream for they're too obvious. It's like the iPhone oil paintings. I need to do them quick.
Say it quick, then it's
I
yours.
need to do them
Do
quick
it.
before they, you need to do it. You need to do it, but.
Just like Deep Dreaming the Deep Dream.
Sort of.
Oh, you have to do it. It's a race. Who can get it done tonight and post it? Do it. Is it Inception?
You were talking. So she was talking about how this is a learning system, and they actually use Deep Dream as a huge artificial intelligence problem has been, playing games, right? So it was easy to create something that could beat a human at checkers. Became hard to do with chess. Then there was, Jeopardy. One of the huge challenges was this game called Go, and it uses black and white little circles on this big board. They really thought there was going to be another 10 years or so, but they used part of Deep Dream and this other game system to actually create something that could beat humans. There are a lot of really, really interesting things.
And the way it beats humans is by learning how that human game plays.
Yeah.
So it's not purely logic.
And actually looking at the board.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
That's a really, is that interesting to me? Sorry, we kind of went off.
Hang on, we got to push our glasses up.
Yeah. Good question, though. Welcome to Conversations at Home with Keetra and JK.
Hi. My question is, when do you decide this is the end of an artwork, when you're in the realm of exploration and exploring the materials or whatever you're working with?
My answer is always when the deadline comes, but that's that is always when he watches me push stuff around.
Yeah.
It really depends on what I think. In my bodies of work, there's these formal focuses, and then I think the stuff that is participatory or object-based lean a little bit more towards conceptual, and I rely on existing apparati, so that's easier. But with the formal explorations, never. I mean, it's always like this domino effect of, I think that's the thing, since I was raised as a graphic designer, I didn't understand what a body of work was, that I could iterate again and again and build on the same idea, and something I hadn't explored, I didn't have to abandon it. I could, push it in this slightly different direction, and that's valid. And so it's never done in that way. And now that's all I do with my form. When is yours?
Well, I'm doing a project that's not going to be done until I'm dead, so
yeah,
that kind of plays into things. But I didn't talk too much about it tonight, but a lot of the work actually is rules systems. So setting up, this does this, creates this line, which then creates this other dot or whatever, and letting that play out. And by setting a finite number on the number of iterations that thing can happen, that's when I call it done. And for me, it's really fun and interesting, and to actually be surprised by what that system plays out and looks like. It's almost like I've set up, in certain works, obviously, there's a definite endpoint, and whatever happens, that's what happens. And I'm not one to usually stick my hand back in the cookie jar and mess things around and make it look better, whereas she just hates that, and she has to go back in and be like,
there's so much potential.
Okay, let this go 100 times.
But it's almost there.
Yeah.
Oh, let's also try this. And what if? Oh, yeah, good. Okay.
That's why it takes her 10 hours to do one Instagram photo. It's terrible.
Are there any technological challenges to living in Alaska?
Moose.
Oops.
Sorry. No, it's actually true, because we were just saying earlier that the bull moose, their horns, they shed every year, and apparently they get very itchy when they grow back, and they scrape them on everything, and they have knocked out our satellite dish repeatedly. And I'm like, son of a... No, I love the moose, but also, son of a bitch.
The biggest challenge is actually just the cost of doing a lot of things. So shipping to Alaska and shipping out of Alaska is insanely expensive. And so anytime you're like, oh, I just want this one little motor, or I just want this one little gadgety thing.
But that's not really a technological.
That's not a technological.
But the surprising thing is, back where we live, we're not totally alone. I always say, if I scream, someone will hear me. They can't find me, but they'll hear me. And generally, everyone falls into two camps. You're either this homesteader, which means you're kind of a recluse and you collect things and you're surviving off the grid and you want to be apart from culture, or you're kind of this craftsman and you just want space to make and make and make. So you'll hear machines going. Everybody, I was running in the middle of nowhere, and I repeatedly ran into this couple with their dog, and it's a retired dentist and nurse, and it turns out that he's refurbishing, what was that car?
Oh, it's just classic Saabs.
But he brought us into his workshop, phenomenal workspace, and then he was telling me how to mechanize one of my crayon apparati, and I was like, no, believe me, we've tried that. We've been seeing stuff, and I have a 3D printer, and he was like, what? And then it turns out the guy down a mile away from us is a machinist, and so through all of these people, we actually have far more resources than we had generous resources than we had access to in New York, where we could have paid specialists to gain access to it. And then we have way faster internet in Alaska than we had when we lived in New York. So yeah. The power goes out every now and again, but it's like we have oil lamps and it's cool.
I was just wondering about like the sound and the resolution pieces. Like, how do you go about getting copyright issues resolved?
I
with
just
those?
don't pay attention.
Good
to it.
question.
Yeah.
It gets taken down a lot though.
Yeah.
You know, if it's displayed.
I've had numerous things taken down off YouTube because of it, but generally they're not going to sue you if you're doing something so manipulative to it.
Yeah, it's such a departure that it's fair use. Is that the right term?
Yeah, I would consider it fair use.
So usually it's legally not a threat, but it does get blocked by the man every now and
Which
again.
is an interesting thing that I hate. So I had, sorry, I'm just going to get on a tangent here.
Is this okay?
On YouTube copyright and their content ID system. So my daily photo video was used for some program in Paris, like a news program or whatever, and I gave them permission to like put it on their news channel. And then they uploaded their news footage to YouTube, and they have a partnership with YouTube that anything that they upload becomes part of YouTube's content ID system, which is like an algorithm that automatically recognizes things that are in copyright by this company. And a day after they uploaded their newscast, my video got sent a copyright notice and was taken down because it was included in there. And it was like a quick fix. I just said, hey, come on, man. And they, that's weird. But it's one of those things where you're like, oh, you're not even like looking at what you're like taking down.
No, you're not a machinist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, thank you so much, JK.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Keetra.